The thunder of hooves drowned out Fiona O'Malley's scream as she tumbled from the boardwalk into the muddy thoroughfare of Snake River, Idaho. It was 1878, and the spring rains had turned the main street into a treacherous swamp that now soaked through her once pristine blue dress, the mud clinging to her like a second skin. "Look at the high and mighty Boston lady now," jeered Samuel Crenshaw, the banker's son who deliberately shoved her as she'd passed by the saloon. His friends erupted in cruel laughter that echoed between the weathered wooden buildings of the frontier town. Fiona struggled to rise, her fingers sinking into the thick muck, her face burning with humiliation. She'd only arrived in Snake River 3 days prior, summoned by the desperate letter from her late brother's wife who had fallen ill, leaving 3 young children to tend for themselves. Boston society hadn't prepared Fiona for the harsh realities of frontier life, nor for the open hostility she'd encountered from certain townsfolk who viewed Easterners with suspicion. "Stay down where you belong, lady," another man called out. "Snake River ain't no place for your kind." Just as Fiona's eyes welled with tears of frustration, a shadow fell across her. She looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. Without a word, the stranger extended a hand toward her. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a well-worn hat, but she could see the sharp angles of his jawline and the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching tentatively for the offered help. In one fluid motion, he pulled her upright. When she was steady on her feet, the man turned toward the group of laughing men. He stood with quiet confidence, shoulders squared, one hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "You think it's funny to push a lady down?" His voice was low but carried clearly across the muddy street. "Shows what kind of men you are. Mind your own business, Zachariah," Samuel sneered. "This ain't your concern." "Miss O'Malley is new to our town," Zachariah replied, his tone deceptively calm. "And she's already shown more courage and character than the lot of you put together." He glanced back at Fiona, taking in her mud-soaked clothing and the determined set of her chin despite her humiliation. "She's been knocked down in the mud, but I'll tell you something, she'll rise higher than any of you." Fiona stared at the stranger Zachariah with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. No one had spoken for her since she'd arrived in Snake River, and certainly not with such conviction. "Is that right?" Samuel took a step forward, hand hovering near the knife at his belt. "And what makes you so sure, Xenner? You sweet on this city girl already." Zachariah Xenner didn't rise to the bait. He simply maintained his steady gaze, and something in his eyes made Samuel and his friends shift uncomfortably. There was history here, Fiona realized, tensions that predated her arrival. "Miss O'Malley came to care for her orphaned nieces and nephew," Zachariah said. "She left behind comfort to do what's right. That shows character, something you boys wouldn't recognize if it spit in your faces." Samuel's face darkened with anger, but he seemed unwilling to challenge Zachariah further. Instead, he spat into the mud, muttered something to his companions, and they retreated into the saloon. When they were gone, Zachariah turned to Fiona. "Are you hurt, Miss O'Malley?" "Only my pride," she replied, attempting to brush some of the mud from her skirts, succeeding only in smearing it further. "How do you know who I am?" A hint of a smile softened his weathered features. "Snake River isn't exactly a metropolis." Word travels when a lady from Boston arrives on the stage. He removed his duster and offered it to her. "Here, wrap this around yourself for the walk home." "I couldn't possibly, please," he insisted. "The mud will dry soon enough and the coat will keep you warm." Fiona hesitated, then accepted the coat with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Mr. Xenner, I'm in your debt." "Zachariah," he corrected her, "or Zach if you prefer, and there's no debt, It's what neighbors do. He glanced down the street. May I escort you to your sister-in-law's place? Those boys might have slunk away, but they're not known for their good sense. Fiona nodded, suddenly aware of how alone she'd been feeling until this moment. I would appreciate that very much, Zachariah. As they walked through town, Fiona noticed how people nodded respectfully to her escort or quickly looked away. Zachariah Xenner clearly commanded a certain respect or perhaps fear in Snake River. You must think me terribly out of place here, she said softly. Not at all, he replied. Just new. Snake River takes some getting used to. The children need me, she said, more to herself than to him. My sister-in-law, Margaret, is very ill, and there's no one else. I couldn't let my brother's children be separated and sent to orphanages. Zachariah's eyes softened. Your brother was Thomas O'Malley, wasn't he? The homesteader who settled north of town last year. Fiona nodded, surprised. You knew him? Not well, but we crossed paths. He spoke of his sister back east, said she had more fire in her than folks gave her credit for. Zachariah's lips curved into a slight smile. I believe he was right. They arrived at the small homestead on the edge of town. It was modest compared to the Boston home Fiona had left behind, but it was well built, a testament to her brother's skill as a carpenter. I should get inside. Margaret will be worrying and the children need their supper, Fiona said, removing the duster and handing it back to him. Miss O'Malley. Zachariah hesitated, then continued. Snake River can be unwelcoming to newcomers, especially those from back east. But there are good people here too. Don't let today's unpleasantness color your view of the whole town. I'll try not to, she promised. And please call me Fiona. Fiona, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. If you need anything supplies, help with repairs around the place, don't hesitate to ask. My ranch is just 3 miles west. The Rocking X, she said, recalling the name she'd heard mentioned. He nodded, seeming pleased that she knew of it. That's right. Thank you again, Zachariah, for everything. He touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture, then turned and walked away. Fiona watched him go, this mysterious man who had defended her honor without hesitation. For the first time since receiving the devastating news of her brother's death in a hunting accident, Fiona felt something other than grief and uncertainty. She couldn't quite name the feeling as she entered the small home where 3 children and their ailing mother waited, but it felt strangely like hope. Inside the cabin, Fiona found 10-year-old James attempting to feed his sisters, 7-year-old Sarah, and 4-year-old Lucy. Margaret was asleep, her breathing labored, her face flushed with fever. Aunt Fiona, Lucy exclaimed, running to her. The child stopped short, her eyes widening at the sight of the mud. You're all dirty. I had a little fall, Fiona explained, trying to sound cheerful. Nothing to worry about. Now, what are we having for supper? James was making beans again, Sarah said with a dramatic sigh. We've had beans every day for forever. Fiona hung up her ruined bonnet and rolled up her sleeves. Well, let's see what we can do about that, shall we? Later, after feeding the children, checking on Margaret, and finally changing out of her mud-stained clothing, Fiona sat at the rough-hewn table and allowed herself a moment of doubt. What had she been thinking, coming to this wild place? She knew nothing of frontier life, had no experience with children, and the hostile reception from some townsfolk suggested she might never be accepted here. But then she remembered Zachariah Xenner's words. She'll rise higher than any of you. There had been such certainty in his voice, such conviction. What had he seen in her to inspire such confidence? Fiona straightened her shoulders. Perhaps it was time she found out. The next morning, Fiona rose before dawn to tend to Margaret, whose condition seemed no better but thankfully no worse. Dr. Simmons had visited the previous evening, prescribing bed rest and a bitter tonic for the lung inflammation that had taken hold after a bout of influenza. After preparing a simple breakfast for the children and seeing James off to school with Sarah in tow, Fiona took stock of the household. The pantry was nearly bare, the woodpile diminishing, and Margaret's medical bills mounting. The small amount of money Thomas had managed to save before his death wouldn't last long. "I need to find work," she murmured to herself, bouncing little Lucy on her hip as she surveyed the vegetable garden that had been neglected in Margaret's illness. "Talking to yourself already, Miss O'Malley. That's usually a sign someone's been in Snake River too long," came a familiar voice. Fiona turned to see Zachariah Xenner approaching on horseback, leading a second horse laden with supplies. "Mr. Xenner," she greeted him, unable to suppress a smile. "What brings you by so early?" He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "Thought you might need some provisions. Flour, sugar, coffee, smoked meat, some vegetables from Mrs. Turnbull's garden." He gestured to the packed saddlebags. "And it's Zachariah, remember." "Zachariah," she corrected herself. "This is incredibly kind, but I can't accept charity." "Not charity," he said firmly. "Consider it a welcome gift. Besides, these are from several folks in town who remember your brother fondly." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Not everyone in Snake River is as disagreeable as Samuel Crenshaw and his cronies." Fiona hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. The children needed food, and Margaret needed nourishment to regain her strength. "Who's that, Aunt Fiona?" Lucy asked, staring at Zachariah with undisguised curiosity. "This is Mr. Xenner," Fiona explained. "He's a friend. You can call me Zach," he told the little girl, tipping his hat to her. "And who might you be, young lady? I'm Lucy," she announced proudly. "I'm 4.5. "That's quite grown up," he replied seriously, earning a giggle from the child. "Mr. Xenner, Zachariah brought us some food, Lucy. Would you like to help me put it away?" Lucy nodded enthusiastically, and Fiona set her down. The little girl immediately took Zachariah's hand with the innocent trust of childhood. "Come on, Zach. I'll show you where everything goes." Caught off guard by Lucy's forwardness, Zachariah shot Fiona a questioning look. She nodded with a smile, and he allowed himself to be led toward the cabin, bringing the supplies with him. As they organized the provisions, Fiona learned that Zachariah Xenner had come to Idaho territory some 8 years earlier, establishing the Rocking X Ranch shortly after the end of the Civil War. He employed several hands and had a reputation for fair dealings and quality livestock. "How is your sister-in-law today?" he asked as they worked. "Much the same," Fiona replied, concern clouding her features. "Dr. Simmons says it may be weeks before she's strong enough to leave her bed." Zachariah nodded thoughtfully. "Thomas's death hit her hard. They were devoted to each other." "Yes, they were," Fiona agreed, remembering the joy in her brother's letters when he described his frontier bride. "I worry how she'll manage once she recovers. The children need so much, and the homestead requires constant work. What about you?" Zachariah asked, his perceptive eyes studying her face. "What were you leaving behind in Boston?" Fiona busied herself with arranging cans on a shelf. "Nothing that couldn't be left," she said simply. "I was a school teacher, unmarried. My parents passed several years ago." What she didn't tell him was how suffocating Boston society had become, how her spinsterhood at 25 had been the subject of pitying glances and whispered comments, how the school board had grown increasingly critical of her progressive teaching methods. "A school teacher," he repeated. "Snake River could use one of those. We've got a schoolhouse, but Mrs. Abernathy, who was teaching, took ill last winter and returned east to be with her daughter." Fiona looked up, surprised. There's no teacher currently. The minister's wife has been filling in, but she's expecting a child soon and can't continue. The town council's been searching for a replacement. I see, Fiona said thoughtfully. Teaching would provide income and a way to establish herself in the community. But there was Margaret to consider, and little Lucy, who wasn't yet school age. I'm not sure I could leave Margaret and Lucy during the day. Ada Turnbull, the woman who sent those vegetables, might be willing to help, Zachariah suggested. Her children are grown, and she often watches the Peterson twins while their mother works at the hotel. The seed of a possibility began to take root in Fiona's mind. Would you happen to know who I should speak with about the position? Mayor Hollister, Zachariah replied. Though I should warn you, he's Samuel Crenshaw's uncle by marriage. Not the most forward-thinking man, but he's fair in his own way. Fiona's determination only grew at this information. If the mayor was related to Samuel, convincing him to hire her might prove challenging. But she had faced skeptical school boards before. Thank you for telling me, she said. I'll call on him tomorrow. Lucy, who had been unusually quiet while they talked, suddenly tugged on Zachariah's sleeve. Do you have horses at your ranch? She asked with wide eyes. I do indeed, he answered, crouching to her level. Several dozen. Real ones? She pressed. He laughed, a rich sound that Fiona found unexpectedly pleasant. Yes, very real ones, including a gentle mare with a new foal that might enjoy meeting a polite young lady such as yourself someday. Lucy's face lit up. Can we go see them, Aunt Fiona, please? Perhaps someday, dear, Fiona hedged, not wanting to impose further on Zachariah's kindness. You're all welcome anytime, he said, rising to his feet. The rocking X isn't fancy, but there's always coffee on the stove and a meal to be had. When he departed shortly after, promising to check in on them soon, Fiona found herself watching his retreating form longer than was strictly proper. There was something compelling about Zachariah Xenner, a quiet strength that drew her attention and made her feel oddly safe in this unfamiliar place. I like Zach, Lucy declared, interrupting her thoughts. He smiles with his eyes. Fiona glanced down at her niece in surprise. That's very observant, Lucy. The child nodded solemnly. Mama says you can always trust people who smile with their eyes. Your mama is a wise woman, Fiona replied, wondering if perhaps Margaret had been right about Zachariah Xenner, and what other insights her sister-in-law might have about the enigmatic rancher. The next day, Fiona left Lucy with Margaret, who was having a more lucid morning, and made her way to the mayor's office in town. She had donned her most professional attire, a navy blue dress with minimal ornamentation, her hair neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. The outfit had served her well in Boston when meeting with school administrators. She hoped it would convey the same sense of capability and seriousness here in Snake River. Mayor Edward Hollister was a portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers and a perpetual expression of mild confusion. He appeared genuinely surprised when Fiona presented herself as a candidate for the vacant teaching position. "You're Thomas O'Malley's sister?" he asked, peering at her over spectacles that seemed too small for his face. "I understood you came west to care for his widow and children." "That remains my primary concern," Fiona assured him. "But Margaret will recover in time, and meanwhile, the children need support. I have 5 years' experience teaching in Boston, including 2 years as head teacher at the Blackwell Academy for Girls." Mayor Hollister looked impressed despite himself. "Blackwell Academy is well regarded. My niece attended a similar institution in Philadelphia." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "But Snake River is not Boston, Miss O'Malley. Our needs are more practical. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Nothing fancy. Basic education is my specialty, Mayor Hollister, Fiona replied confidently. Though I believe all children benefit from exposure to literature, history, and natural sciences as well. He said noncommittally. Our school has 28 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. One room, limited materials. The previous teacher complained constantly about the conditions. I'm not afraid of challenges, sir. The mayor studied her for a long moment. No, I don't suppose you are. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. I should tell you that some on the town council have expressed reservations about hiring another Easterner, especially one who may not remain permanently. I understand their concerns, Fiona said carefully. But my brother chose Snake River as his home, which means it's now home to his children, my nieces and nephew. I intend to ensure they grow up here as he would have wanted. Mayor Hollister nodded slowly. I knew Thomas. Good man. Honest worker. He seemed to come to a decision. The council meets tomorrow evening. I'll present your application then. The pay isn't much, $30 a month during the school term. Thank you, Mayor. That would be most appreciated. As Fiona rose to leave, the mayor added, I heard about what happened your first day in town. Samuel can be difficult, but he's not a bad sort at heart. Fiona doubted that assessment but maintained a neutral expression. I prefer to form my own opinions of people based on their actions, she said diplomatically. The mayor's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. Fair enough. I also heard that Zachariah Xenner took it upon himself to intervene. Mr. Xenner was very kind, Fiona confirmed. Xenner's an interesting man, Mayor Hollister said, his tone carefully neutral. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's been good for Snake River. Brings business to town, employs several men, pays his debts promptly. Fiona sensed there was more the mayor wasn't saying. You sound as though you're warning me about him, sir. Mayor Hollister shook his head. Not at all, just Xenner has history in these parts. Some folks remember it, others don't. That's all. Before Fiona could ask what he meant, the mayor stood up, clearly signaling the end of their meeting. Good day, Miss O'Malley. I'll send word after the council meeting. As Fiona left the mayor's office, she nearly collided with Samuel Crenshaw, who was entering the building. His eyes narrowed when he recognized her. Well, if it isn't the Mud Lady, he drawled. What brings you to civilized company today? Fiona straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. Good morning, Mr. Crenshaw. I've just had a very productive meeting with Mayor Hollister regarding the teaching position. Samuel's expression shifted from mockery to surprise, then concern. Teaching position. You? Yes, she replied simply. Have a good day. She walked past him with her head held high, feeling a small surge of satisfaction at having unsettled him. As she made her way back toward the edge of town, she noticed several people watching her with undisguised curiosity. Word traveled fast in Snake River, it seemed. At the general store, where she stopped to purchase a few necessities, the proprietor's wife was unexpectedly friendly. You're Thomas O'Malley's sister, aren't you? The woman asked as she wrapped Fiona's purchases in brown paper. Yes, I'm Fiona O'Malley. Martha Jenkins, the woman introduced herself. My husband George owns the store. We knew your brother well. He built our counter and those shelves along the back wall. Fine craftsman. Thank you, Fiona said, touched by this positive mention of Thomas. He loved working with his hands. Martha lowered her voice. I heard you're applying for the teaching position. That's wonderful news. The children have been falling behind with all the disruptions. Nothing's been decided yet, Fiona cautioned. The council meets tomorrow. Well, you have my support, Martha declared. And George's too. We have 3 children in that school and they need a proper teacher. By the time Fiona returned to the homestead, she felt cautiously optimistic about her prospects in Snake River. Not everyone shared Samuel Crenshaw's hostility, it seemed. She found Margaret sitting up in a chair by the window, Lucy playing with a rag doll at her feet. It was the first time since Fiona's arrival that her sister-in-law had left her bed. "You're up," Fiona exclaimed, hurrying to her side. "How are you feeling?" "Weak as a newborn kitten," Margaret admitted, her voice thin but her eyes clearer than they had been. "But the fever's broken, at least for now." Fiona felt her forehead, relieved to find it cool to the touch. "That's wonderful news. Dr. Simmons will be pleased when he visits tomorrow." "Lucy tells me we had a visitor yesterday," Margaret said, glancing at her daughter. "Zachariah Xenner. Yes, he brought some provisions for us. Very thoughtful of him." A knowing look crossed Margaret's pale face. "Zach doesn't make social calls often. Must have made quite an impression on him." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "We had a chance meeting in town. He was kind enough to help me after a small incident." "Lucy mentioned mud," Margaret prompted. "It was nothing, really." Fiona busied herself unpacking her purchases. "Fiona," Margaret said gently, "this isn't Boston. People talk." "I've already heard 3 different versions of what happened, courtesy of Ada Turnbull, who stopped by earlier with more of her remedy tea." Fiona sighed and related the full story of her encounter with Samuel Crenshaw and Zachariah's intervention. Margaret listened attentively, her expression growing troubled. "Samuel's had it in for the Xenner ranch since his father lost land to Zach in a poker game years back, but to treat you that way." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, Fiona. You came all this way to help us, and this is the welcome you receive." "Please don't worry about it," Fiona assured her. "Actually, I may have found a way to support us while you recover. I've applied for the teaching position at the school." Margaret's eyes widened. "That's perfect. You were a teacher in Boston, weren't you?" "Yes, though the school here is quite different, I imagine." "Different, but no less important," Margaret said firmly. "Those children need education just as much as any in Boston." She hesitated, then added, "But what about Lucy?" "She's too young for school. If I get the position, I thought perhaps Ada Turnbull might watch her during school hours. Zachariah mentioned she sometimes cares for other children." Margaret smiled faintly. "Zachariah seems to have all the answers." "He's been helpful," Fiona acknowledged, keeping her tone neutral despite the knowing look in her sister-in-law's eyes. "He would be," Margaret murmured. "Thomas always said Xenner was the most honorable man in Idaho territory, despite what some folks say about his past." "The mayor hinted at something similar," Fiona said, her curiosity piqued. "What exactly is this history everyone keeps referencing?" Margaret sighed. "It's not my story to tell, Fiona. But I will say this: Zachariah Xenner came to Snake River with ghosts following him, and he spent years trying to outrun them. He's largely succeeded, but memories are long in places like this." Fiona wanted to press for details, but Lucy had tired of her doll and was tugging at her skirt, asking for a story. The mystery of Zachariah Xenner's past would have to wait for another day. That evening, after the children were asleep and Margaret had returned to her bed, Fiona sat on the cabin's small porch, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. The vast openness of the landscape still startled her after years in crowded Boston. Here, the stars emerged with startling clarity, countless points of light against the deepening blue. The sound of approaching hooves drew her attention. A rider was coming up the path to the cabin, his figure outlined against the darkening horizon. As he drew nearer, Fiona recognized Zachariah's broad-shouldered silhouette. "Evening, Miss O'Malley," he called softly as he dismounted. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she replied, standing to greet him. "And please, it's Fiona." He secured his horse to the hitching post and approached the porch, removing his hat. In the fading light, his features seemed softer, less guarded. "I heard you visited Mayor Hollister today," he said. "News travels fast." "So I'm learning," she replied with a small smile. "The council meets tomorrow to decide. They'd be fools not to hire you." "That's kind of you to say, though you've no idea of my teaching abilities." "I'm a fair judge of character," he replied simply. "And Snake River needs people like you, people willing to invest in its future." Fiona was touched by his faith in her. "Margaret was up today," she said, changing the subject. "Her fever's broken. That's good news. She's a strong woman, your sister-in-law." "Yes, she is." Fiona hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to sit for a while? It's a beautiful evening." If he was surprised by the invitation, he didn't show it. "I'd like that." They settled on the porch steps, a respectable distance between them. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching as more stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I never saw stars like this in Boston," Fiona commented. "There were always too many buildings, too many lamps." "That's one thing I love about Idaho," Zachariah replied. "The sky feels endless." "Have you always lived in the West?" she asked, sensing an opportunity to learn more about this enigmatic man. A shadow seemed to pass over his face. "No, I grew up in Missouri, came west after the war." "You fought in the Civil War?" Fiona asked gently. He nodded, his expression growing distant. "Union cavalry, 4 long years." Fiona waited, sensing there was more to the story, but he offered nothing further. Instead, he asked, "What made you become a teacher?" Grateful for the change of subject, she told him about her love of learning, her belief that education could transform lives, her frustration with the rigid Boston school system that valued memorization over understanding. "You speak about it with such passion," he observed when she finally paused. "Snake River's children would be fortunate to have you as their teacher." "If the council agrees," she reminded him. "They will," he said with quiet confidence. After a moment he added, "I brought something for your nephew. Noticed yesterday he's using his father's tools, but they're too large for him." From his saddlebag, Zachariah produced a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it to reveal a set of child-sized woodworking tools, a hammer, a small saw, a plane, and several other implements. "My ranch hand Daniel makes these for his son," Zachariah explained. "Thought James might put them to good use." "That's incredibly thoughtful," Fiona said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "James misses working alongside Thomas. These will mean so much to him." "Every boy needs something that's his own," Zachariah said simply. "Something he can take pride in." As he rewrapped the tools, Fiona studied his profile in the starlight, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet concentration in his movements. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged appearance, a thoughtfulness that surprised and intrigued her. "You're very kind, Zachariah," she said softly. He glanced up, seemingly embarrassed by the praise. "Just being neighborly." "Is that all it is?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Their eyes met in the darkness, and something unspoken passed between them. For a long moment, neither moved nor spoke. Then, from inside the cabin, Lucy's voice called out, "Aunt Fiona." The moment broke. Fiona stood quickly. "I should go to her. She sometimes has nightmares." Zachariah rose as well, placing his hat back on his head. "Of course, I should be getting back to the ranch anyway." "Thank you for the tools," Fiona said, "and for checking on us." "I'll stop by tomorrow evening," he promised. "Let you know what the council decides, if you haven't already heard." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Fiona found herself watching until his figure disappeared into the darkness. Only then did she go inside to comfort Lucy, her thoughts still lingering on the moment they'd shared and the questions it raised. The next day dragged endlessly for Fiona. She kept busy with household chores, tending to Margaret, and beginning to restore the neglected vegetable garden. But her thoughts continually returned to the evening council meeting that would decide her fate in Snake River. James and Sarah returned from school full of questions about whether she might become their teacher. Word had clearly spread throughout the small community. "Billy Jenkins says his ma says you're the best teacher Snake River could hope for," James reported as he helped her weed the garden. "But Toby Crenshaw says his cousin Samuel says you're too fancy for our town." "Everyone's entitled to their opinion," Fiona replied diplomatically. "We'll just have to wait and see what the council decides." Sarah, who was helping Lucy water the newly turned soil, looked up with worried eyes. "But you won't leave if they don't choose you, will you, Aunt Fiona?" "Of course not, sweetheart," Fiona assured her, setting aside her trowel to pull the child into a hug. "I came here for you, not for a teaching position." As evening approached, Fiona grew increasingly anxious. She had just finished putting the children to bed when a knock came at the door. Her heart leapt, thinking it might be Zachariah with news, but when she opened the door, she found Martha Jenkins standing there. "Evening, Miss O'Malley," the storekeeper's wife said. "Thought you might like to know right away the council's approved your appointment as teacher. 8 votes to 3. "Oh," Fiona exclaimed, relief washing over her. "That's wonderful news. Thank you for coming all this way to tell me," Martha beamed. "My George voted for you, of course." So did Mayor Hollister, which surprised some folks given his connection to the Crenshaws. "You're to start on Monday if that suits you." "Monday would be perfect," Fiona assured her. "Excellent. I'll have George bring the school keys and register by tomorrow." Martha leaned in conspiratorially. "Between us," Xenner spoke to the council before the vote. "Said Snake River would be fools to pass up a Boston-educated teacher willing to take on our humble school." Coming from him, that carried weight. Fiona felt a rush of gratitude toward Zachariah. That was very kind of him. "Kind, yes," Martha agreed with a knowing smile. "Though I don't recall him ever taking such an interest in school matters before. Good night, Miss O'Malley. Welcome to Snake River officially this time." After Martha left, Fiona sat on the porch, her heart full. The teaching position would provide stability and income. But more importantly, it offered a chance to truly become part of this community that her brother had chosen as his home. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting there when she heard the now familiar sound of Zachariah's horse approaching. He rode into view, and even in the darkness, she could sense his smile. "I hear congratulations are in order, Miss O'Malley," he called as he dismounted. "So you've heard the news," she replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "I understand I have you to thank in part." He joined her on the porch, shaking his head. "I only spoke the truth that Snake River would be fortunate to have you. The council made the right decision." Martha Jenkins said you spoke quite persuasively. A hint of embarrassment crossed his features. "Martha tends to exaggerate." "Nevertheless, I'm grateful," Fiona insisted. "Not just for your support with the council, but for everything you've done since I arrived." She hesitated, then added softly, "You were right that first day. Snake River isn't all like Samuel Crenshaw and his friends." "No," Zachariah agreed. "It's mostly good people trying to build something lasting out here. People like you," she said, his expression turned guarded. "I don't know about that. I've made my share of mistakes, Fiona." "Haven't we all?" she countered gently. A long moment passed between them, the silence humming with unspoken words. Finally, Zachariah cleared his throat. "I brought something to celebrate your appointment," he said, producing a small package from his coat pocket. "It's not much." Fiona unwrapped the brown paper to find a beautiful brass bell, small enough to fit comfortably in her hand but with a clear, bright tone when she rang it experimentally. "It's lovely," she said, genuinely touched. "Perfect for calling students to attention." "I noticed the school's old bell was cracked last time I rode past," he explained. "Thought you might need a new one." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "Thank you, Zachariah, I'll treasure it." Their eyes met, and for a breath, Fiona thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he stepped back slightly, breaking the moment. "I should let you rest," he said. "You'll have a busy few days ahead preparing for your first day of teaching. Will I see you again before Monday?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. Something like pleasure flickered in his eyes. "I could stop by tomorrow evening if you'd like. Bring that mare and foal I mentioned for Lucy to see." "She'd love that," Fiona said. "We all would." After he left, Fiona remained on the porch, the brass bell cradled in her hands, her thoughts full of the man who'd given it to her. There was something growing between them, something undefined yet undeniable. It both excited and frightened her, this unexpected connection in a place where she'd expected only to find family obligations. With a sigh, she finally went inside, knowing she should get some rest. Monday would indeed be a busy day, the beginning of her new role in Snake River. But as she prepared for bed, her thoughts kept returning to Zachariah Xenner and the mysteries that surrounded him. What ghosts from his past still haunted him? And why did she feel so drawn to this reserved, kind-hearted rancher who had defended her honor in the mud? Fiona's first day as Snake River's schoolteacher dawned clear and cool. She'd spent the weekend preparing the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with rows of rough-hewn desks, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a larger desk at the front for the teacher. The previous day, Zachariah had indeed brought a gentle mare and her foal for Lucy to meet, much to the child's delight. He'd stayed for supper, joining them at the table for Margaret's rabbit stew. It was the first time Fiona had seen him truly relaxed, laughing at James's jokes and listening intently to Sarah's elaborate stories. "You're good with children," Fiona had observed as they stood outside afterward, watching the sunset. "They're easy to be good with," he'd replied. "Honest. Straightforward. Not like adults with all their complications." Now, as Fiona rang her new brass bell to call her students into the schoolhouse, she felt a surge of nervous excitement. 28 children of various ages filed in, regarding her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. "Good morning," she began, setting the bell carefully on her desk. "I'm Miss O'Malley, your new teacher. I'm very pleased to meet each of you." A tentative hand rose near the back of the room. It belonged to a girl of about 12 with auburn braids. "Yes," Fiona encouraged. "Are you really from Boston?" the girl asked. "With fancy schools and everything, I am from Boston," Fiona confirmed. "But I assure you, children are the same everywhere, curious, capable, and ready to learn. Now, shall we begin with introductions? I'd like to know each of your names." As the morning progressed, Fiona assessed her pupils' varying levels of education. Some of the older boys clearly hadn't attended regularly in recent months, their reading skills rusty and their arithmetic spotty. The younger children were eager but undisciplined. By noon, when she released them for the midday meal break, Fiona had a clearer picture of the challenges ahead. She was organizing her notes when the schoolhouse door opened, and Samuel Crenshaw sauntered in, followed by an older man she recognized as the banker, Harold Crenshaw. "Miss O'Malley," Samuel drawled, his tone mockingly polite. "Father wanted to welcome Snake River's newest teacher." Harold Crenshaw stepped forward with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, we're pleased the council found someone so qualified to instruct our youth." "Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw," Fiona replied evenly, rising from her desk. "I'm honored by the opportunity." "My nephew Tobias says you're quite strict," the banker commented. "Had the children reciting poetry this morning." "Not strict," Fiona corrected. Structured. And yes, I believe literature enriches education, even in practical subjects. Samuel snorted. These are ranchers' and farmers' children, Miss O'Malley. They need to cipher well enough to avoid being cheated and read well enough to understand contracts. Poetry won't help them survive out here. I respectfully disagree, Mr. Crenshaw, Fiona replied, keeping her voice level despite her rising irritation. Education should expand horizons, not merely prepare children for a predetermined life. The banker's expression hardened. Snake River has certain expectations for its school, Miss O'Malley. It would be wise to meet them if you intend to remain in this position. The implicit threat was clear. Before Fiona could respond, the door opened again and Zachariah stepped in. His eyes quickly assessed the situation. Crenshaw, he nodded to the banker, deliberately ignoring Samuel. Paying a visit to our new teacher. Just offering some friendly advice, Harold replied, his tone cooling noticeably. Miss O'Malley doesn't need advice on teaching, Zachariah said mildly. That's why the council hired her. The tension in the small room was palpable. Finally, Harold adjusted his waistcoat and inclined his head stiffly. We'll leave you to your preparations, Miss O'Malley. Come, Samuel. After they departed, Fiona released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you. That was becoming uncomfortable. The Crenshaws like to remind everyone who holds the purse strings in Snake River, Zachariah explained. Don't let them intimidate you. I won't, she promised, though I suspect they'll be watching my every move. Let them watch, he said with quiet confidence. You'll prove yourself through your work, not by bending to their expectations. Fiona smiled gratefully. What brings you to the schoolhouse? Surely not just a timely rescue. Actually, I brought lunch, he admitted, producing a cloth-wrapped package. Thought you might be too busy to prepare something for yourself on your first day. The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed her heart. That's very kind, but won't your ranch hands be wondering where you are? I can't imagine the owner often disappears at midday. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Advantages of being the boss, Miss O'Malley. I can disappear whenever I please. They shared the lunch thick sandwiches, apple slices, and oatmeal cookies sitting on the schoolhouse steps in the autumn sunshine. Fiona told him about her morning, the challenges and bright spots, and her plans for organizing the students into appropriate learning groups. You have a gift for teaching, Zachariah observed. It shows in how you talk about it. It's always been my passion, she admitted. Even when the Boston School Board found my methods too progressive. Their loss is Snake River's gain, he said simply. When the children began returning from their lunch break, Zachariah took his leave, but not before several students greeted him by name, clearly comfortable with the rancher. Mr. Xenner taught us to lasso last summer at the town picnic, explained a freckle-faced boy named Timothy. Did he now? Fiona glanced at Zachariah with raised eyebrows. Basic frontier skill, he deadpanned, though his eyes sparkled with humor. Perhaps more useful than poetry, according to some. Fiona laughed. Perhaps we need both, Mr. Xenner, a well-rounded education. As he tipped his hat in farewell, Fiona felt a familiar flutter in her chest. There was something about Zachariah Xenner that increasingly occupied her thoughts, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the mysteries that surrounded him. The afternoon session went smoothly, and when Fiona dismissed her students at 3 o'clock, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was where she belonged, at least for now, teaching these eager young minds, helping to shape the future of Snake River. As the weeks passed, Fiona settled into a rhythm. Mornings were devoted to teaching, afternoons to caring for Margaret, who was slowly regaining her strength, and the children. Ada Turnbull had indeed agreed to watch Lucy during school hours, and the arrangement worked splendidly. Zachariah visited frequently, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book for Fiona's classroom, a wooden toy he'd carved for Lucy, fresh vegetables from his ranch garden. Often, he stayed for supper, and these evenings quickly became the highlight of Fiona's week. Margaret watched their growing connection with knowing eyes but said little, except once, when she and Fiona were alone hanging laundry. "He looks at you the way Thomas used to look at me," she observed quietly. "Like you're the answer to a question he's been asking for years." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "We're friends, that's all." "If you say so," Margaret replied, a smile playing at her lips. "But I haven't seen Zachariah Xenner this at ease since he came to Snake River. You're good for him, Fiona." As autumn deepened toward winter, Fiona's reputation as a teacher grew. Parents noted their children's improved skills and enthusiasm for learning. Even Mayor Hollister commented on the positive changes at the school when he visited to observe a lesson. Not everyone was pleased, however. Harold Crenshaw continued to make pointed comments about the impractical nature of Fiona's curriculum, and Samuel seemed to take every opportunity to undermine her standing in the community. "Don't let them get to you," Zachariah advised one evening as they walked back from a town meeting where Samuel had publicly questioned the expense of new books for the school. "The Crenshaws are fighting a losing battle. Most folks can see the good you're doing." "I just don't understand their hostility," Fiona sighed. "Surely better education benefits everyone in Snake River." Zachariah's expression grew thoughtful. "It's not really about education. The Crenshaws have controlled this town for years through the bank. Knowledge is power, and they don't like sharing power." "And what about their animosity toward you?" Fiona asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more. "Martha Jenkins mentioned a poker game, but I sense there's more to the story." Zachariah was quiet for so long that Fiona thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "It's a long story and not a particularly pleasant one, but you deserve to know, especially if you're going to continue facing their resentment." He guided her to a bench outside the general store, now closed for the evening. The street was quiet, most of Snake River's residents already home for supper. "I came to Idaho Territory in 1870, he began. "I'd spent the years after the war drifting, working ranch jobs across the West. I had no intentions of staying in Snake River, but then I met a man named William Foster. He owned what's now the Rocking X." Zachariah's eyes grew distant with memory. "Foster was old, no family, and his health was failing. He took a liking to me, offered me work as his foreman. A year later, when he knew he was dying, he sold me the ranch for a fair price, on terms I could manage." "That seems straightforward enough," Fiona said, puzzled. "It was, except for one thing. Harold Crenshaw had been counting on acquiring that land when Foster died. The Rocking X controls the best water access for miles, and Crenshaw wanted it for his own expanding holdings. So that's the root of his resentment. A business disappointment." Zachariah shook his head. "That was just the beginning. After Foster died, Crenshaw tried to contest the sale, claimed I'd taken advantage of a dying man. When that failed, he called in loans from several local businesses that did trade with my ranch, trying to force me to sell through financial pressure." "That's despicable," Fiona said, indignant on his behalf. "It gets worse," Zachariah continued. "In '72, there was a severe drought. Crenshaw saw his opportunity and dammed the creek that runs from my property to several smaller farms, claimed riparian rights through some legal manipulation. What happened? 3 families lost their entire crops that year. One lost their homestead entirely when they couldn't make their loan payments to Crenshaw's bank, of course. Zachariah's voice hardened. I couldn't let it stand. I filed a lawsuit, brought in a lawyer from Boise. The case dragged on for months, but eventually we won. The court ordered Crenshaw to remove the dam and pay damages to the affected farmers. No wonder he hates you, Fiona murmured. You challenged his power and won. It made me some friends and plenty of enemies, Zachariah acknowledged. But there's more to it, and this is the part I'm not proud of. He fell silent again, seeming to gather his thoughts. Fiona waited patiently, sensing the importance of what he was about to share. During the war, I served under a colonel named James Crenshaw, he finally continued. Harold's brother. Fiona's eyes widened in surprise. I had no idea the Crenshaws had connections to the Union Army. They didn't, Zachariah said grimly. James Crenshaw fought for the Confederacy. I was Union. But you said you served under him. Zachariah's face was etched with old pain. In '64, I was captured near Atlanta. Spent 6 months in a prisoner camp under Crenshaw's command. It was brutal. Many men died from starvation, disease, mistreatment. How terrible, Fiona whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand. He allowed the contact, his large hand engulfing hers. I survived, obviously, but many didn't. After the war, I testified at a military tribunal about conditions in the camp. Crenshaw was convicted of war crimes, served 3 years in prison. He died shortly after his release, took his own life. And Harold blames you for his brother's fate, Fiona concluded, the pieces falling into place. Zachariah nodded. He doesn't know I'm the same Xenner who testified I went by my middle name, Thomas, during the war. But he knows I was Union cavalry, and that's enough reason for him to hate me. The land dispute just gave him a public justification. Have you ever told him the truth? Fiona asked. What would be the point? Zachariah replied wearily. It wouldn't change anything. His brother was guilty of terrible things. My testimony was truthful. Opening that old wound would only make things worse. They sat in silence for a moment, their hands still joined. Fiona's heart ached for the young soldier Zachariah had been, for the horrors he'd witnessed, for the burden he still carried. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. I should have told you sooner, he admitted. The Crenshaw's vendetta against me is now affecting you, and that's not fair. Life rarely is, Fiona replied, but knowing the truth helps, and it explains much about you, Zachariah. He looked at her questioningly. Your kindness, she elaborated. Your concern for justice. Your willingness to stand up for those who can't defend themselves, like a woman knocked down in the mud. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Anyone would have done the same. No, Fiona said firmly. Not anyone. That's what makes you different, Zachariah Xenner. That's what makes you special. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Without conscious thought, Fiona leaned closer, and Zachariah's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. They moved apart as Dr. Simmons rounded the corner, nodding politely to them as he passed. I should get you home, Zachariah said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. It's getting late. The walk back to the homestead was quiet, both of them absorbed in their thoughts. At the door, Zachariah hesitated. I hope what I told you doesn't change your opinion of me, he said quietly. It does, Fiona replied honestly. It makes me admire you even more. Before he could respond, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Good night, Zachariah. As she closed the door behind her, her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. The mysteries surrounding Zachariah Xenner had begun to unravel, revealing a man of principle and courage beneath the reserved exterior. And in that revelation, Fiona's feelings for him had only deepened. As winter settled over Snake River, the homestead took on a cozier atmosphere. Margaret's health continued to improve, and she gradually resumed her household duties. The children thrived under the combined care of their mother and aunt, with James particularly blossoming under Zachariah's occasional guidance. Fiona's school flourished despite the continuing opposition from the Crenshaws. When Harold managed to block funding for new slates and chalk through his influence on the town council, several parents led by George and Martha Jenkins organized a donation drive. When Samuel spread rumors that Fiona was teaching radical Eastern ideas about equality, many families responded by attending her special evening lecture on American history, showing their support. Through it all, Zachariah remained a steady presence in Fiona's life. Their relationship evolved gradually from friendship to something deeper, though neither had put their feelings into words. They were rarely alone. There were always children around, or Margaret, or townsfolk, but the connection between them grew nonetheless, expressed in shared glances, brief touches, and unspoken understanding. Then, 3 days before Christmas, everything changed. Fiona was supervising the school's Christmas pageant rehearsal when the door burst open, and Ada Turnbull rushed in, her face pale with worry. "Miss O'Malley, come quick, there's been an accident at the Xenner ranch. They've brought Zachariah to the doctor's office." Fiona's heart seemed to stop. "What happened?" Horse threw him while they were bringing in cattle ahead of the storm. "That's all I know." Ada glanced at the children, who had fallen silent. "Mrs. Peterson is outside. She'll watch the children for the rest of the rehearsal." Without hesitation, Fiona grabbed her coat and hurried into the street. Snow was beginning to fall, large flakes that promised the blizzard the cattlemen had been preparing for. She rushed to Dr. Simmons' office at the end of town, praying as she hadn't in years. Inside, she found the waiting room crowded with rocking ex-ranch hands. Daniel, Zachariah's foreman, stood when she entered. "Miss O'Malley," he acknowledged with a nod. "Doc's with him now." "How bad is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. Daniel's weathered face was grim. "Bad enough. Hit his head on a rock when he fell. Was unconscious when we brought him in." Fiona sank onto a bench, her legs suddenly weak. "What happened exactly?" "We were moving the herd to the south pasture, away from the high ground where the storm will hit hardest," Daniel explained. One of the young bulls spooked, charged at the boss's horse. Horse reared. Boss stayed on, but when they came down, they hit an icy patch. Horse went down, rolled right over him before any of us could get there. Fiona closed her eyes briefly, the image vivid and terrifying. "And the horse?" "Had to put her down," Daniel said quietly. "Broke her leg in the fall." That would be another blow to Zachariah when he woke, Fiona thought. If he woke, the door to the examination room opened and Dr. Simmons emerged, looking tired and concerned. His eyes found Fiona immediately. "Miss O'Malley," he said with a nod. "I was about to send someone for you." "How is he?" she asked, rising to her feet. "Stable for now. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, and various cuts and bruises. The head injury is my primary concern. He's still unconscious, which isn't a good sign." "Can I see him?" Fiona's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Simmons hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly, I've done all I can medically. Sometimes having someone they care about nearby can help bring patients back." He led her into the small examination room where Zachariah lay motionless on the table. Fiona's breath caught at the sight of him, so pale, so vulnerable, a bandage around his head stained with blood. "I'll give you a few minutes," the doctor said, stepping out and closing the door. Fiona moved to Zachariah's side, taking his hand gently in hers. It was cold, and she rubbed it between her palms, trying to warm it. "Zachariah," she said softly, "it's Fiona. I need you to wake up now." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. You promised to help with the Christmas pageant, remember? Lucy's counting on you to see her as an angel." There was no response, not even a flicker of movement beneath his closed eyelids. Tears welled in Fiona's eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Please come back to me. I love you, Zachariah. I should have told you before, but I'm telling you now. I love you and I need you to fight." She leaned down and pressed her lips gently to his forehead, a tear falling onto his cheek. For a long moment, she stayed there, her heart pouring out silent prayers. When Dr. Simmons returned, he found her still holding Zachariah's hand, speaking to him softly about Christmas plans, school anecdotes, anything to maintain a connection. "We should move him to the back room," the doctor said gently. "He'll need constant monitoring through the night." "I'll stay with him," Fiona said immediately. Dr. Simmons frowned. "Miss O'Malley, that wouldn't be proper, propriety be damned," she interrupted, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I'm not leaving him." After a moment the doctor nodded. "Very well, but I'll have my wife present as well for the sake of appearances." "Thank you," Fiona said gratefully. As the storm intensified outside, Zachariah was moved to a small room at the back of the doctor's house. Daniel arranged for a message to be sent to Margaret, explaining the situation. Mrs. Simmons brought soup and blankets, her kind eyes full of understanding as she observed Fiona's vigilance. Throughout the long night, Fiona maintained her watch. She bathed Zachariah's forehead with cool cloths, adjusted his blankets, and talked to him continuously, hoping some part of him could hear her. She told him about her life in Boston, her dreams for the future, her growing love for Snake River despite its challenges. And she told him, again and again, that she loved him. Dawn was breaking, the blizzard still raging, when Zachariah's eyelids finally flickered. Fiona, dozing in a chair beside the bed, snapped awake at the slight movement. "Zachariah," she whispered, leaning forward. His eyes opened slowly, confusion evident as he tried to focus. "Fiona," his voice was a hoarse rasp. Yes, it's me," she said, joy and relief flooding through her. "You're at Dr. Simmons' house. You were injured in a fall." He blinked, struggling to organize his thoughts. "The cattle. The storm." "Daniel and the men handled everything," she assured him. "The herd is safe. You just need to rest and recover now." Memory seemed to return gradually. "You've been here all night, of course," she said simply. A faint smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." "Determined," she corrected, returning his smile through tears of relief. Dr. Simmons, alerted by their voices, entered to examine his patient. "Good to see you back among the living, Xenner," he said briskly. "You had us worried." After a thorough examination, the doctor pronounced Zachariah on the road to recovery, though he would need extensive rest to heal properly. "No riding for at least 6 weeks," he instructed. "Those ribs need time, and I want to be certain there are no lingering effects from the concussion." 6 weeks, Zachariah protested weakly. "Doc, I have a ranch to run." "You have capable hands," the doctor replied firmly. "And I'm sure Miss O'Malley will ensure you follow medical advice." Fiona nodded emphatically. "Absolutely." When they were alone again, Zachariah reached for Fiona's hand. "Thank you for staying," he said softly. "I heard you, I think. Your voice kept pulling me back." "You heard me?" Fiona asked, suddenly wondering exactly what parts of her one-sided conversation had reached him. "Not everything," he admitted, "but enough to know you were here, that you cared." It made a difference. Their eyes met, and the emotion between them was palpable. Before either could speak further, however, the door opened and Samuel Crenshaw stepped in, followed by his father. Well, Samuel drawled. "The schoolteacher playing nurse, how touching." Fiona stiffened but kept her voice level. "Mr. Crenshaw, this is hardly the time for a visit." Harold Crenshaw moved to the foot of the bed, his cold eyes assessing Zachariah. "Actually, Miss O'Malley, this is precisely the right time. Business often is best conducted when circumstances clarify priorities." "What business could we possibly have, Crenshaw?" Zachariah asked, his voice weak but determined. "I've brought a proposition," the banker replied. "In light of your incapacitation and the likely difficulties your ranch will face in the coming months, the bank is prepared to purchase the Rocking X. At a fair price, naturally." Fiona gasped at the audacity of it. "You're attempting to take advantage of his condition. That's unconscionable." "It's business, Miss O'Malley," Harold replied smoothly. "The Rocking X requires active management, particularly through winter. With Xenner unable to provide that management for an extended period, the value of the property will inevitably decline." "The answer is no, Crenshaw," Zachariah said firmly. "Same as it was last year and the year before that. The Rocking X isn't for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Samuel stepped closer, his expression malicious. "Be reasonable, Xenner. You're in no condition to run that place. By spring, it'll be worth half what we're offering now." "I believe Mr. Xenner has given you his answer," Fiona interjected, standing to face the Crenshaws. "And Dr. Simmons was clear that he needs rest. I must ask you to leave." Harold's face hardened. "This isn't over, Xenner. Think about our offer. It won't remain open indefinitely." He turned to Fiona. "As for you, Miss O'Malley, the school board will be most interested to hear how you've compromised your position by spending the night with an unmarried man, regardless of the circumstances." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Crenshaw?" Fiona asked, her voice steady despite her rising anger. "Merely stating facts," the banker replied coldly. "Come, Samuel." After they departed, Fiona sank back into her chair, trembling with fury and worry. The nerve of that man! To threaten your livelihood and my reputation in one visit. "It's how the Crenshaws operate," Zachariah said wearily. "Leverage any vulnerability they can find." Fiona's mind was racing. "They won't stop, will they? They'll use your injury to try to take the ranch, and they'll use my presence here to try to take my teaching position." "I won't let them hurt you," Zachariah promised, though his weakened state made the vow seem painfully inadequate. "Nor will I let them take what's yours," Fiona replied with determination. "We'll find a way through this, Zachariah. Together." The intensity in her eyes must have conveyed more than her words, for Zachariah's expression softened. "Fiona," he began hesitantly, "during the night when I was drifting in and out of consciousness, I thought I heard you say—" He paused, seeming uncertain whether to continue. "That I love you," she finished for him, her heart pounding. "You didn't imagine it. I do love you, Zachariah. I think I have since that first day when you helped me up from the mud and defended me to the town bullies." For a moment, he seemed unable to respond, emotions playing across his face. Then, with effort, he raised his hand to gently touch her cheek. "I love you too," he said simply. "More than I thought possible. But Fiona, my life is complicated, and now with this injury." "Do you think I care about that?" she interrupted. "I didn't fall in love with your circumstances, Zachariah. I fell in love with you, your kindness, your integrity, your strength." "The Crenshaws will make things difficult," he warned. "They already have been," she countered. "We'll face them together just as we'll face your recovery together." The conviction in her voice seemed to reassure him. "Together," he repeated, a new resolve entering his eyes. "I like the sound of that." The blizzard continued for 3 days, effectively isolating Snake River from the surrounding area. During this time, Zachariah remained at the doctor's house, his condition slowly improving. Fiona divided her time between caring for him, checking on Margaret and the children, who were safely weathering the storm with ample supplies, and preparing for the delayed Christmas pageant. Word of the Crenshaws' visit, and their threats spread quickly through the small community. To Fiona's surprise and gratitude, the reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Martha Jenkins organized a rotation of women to help Mrs. Simmons care for Zachariah, ensuring Fiona's reputation remained intact while allowing her to spend time with him. Daniel and the Rocking X hands maintained operations at the ranch, reporting daily despite the difficult conditions. Most significantly, Mayor Hollister himself visited Fiona at the schoolhouse the day after the storm cleared. "Miss O'Malley," he began awkwardly, twisting his hat in his hands, "I want to assure you that your position as teacher is secure. The school board met last evening, those of us who could make it through the snow, and we voted unanimously to extend your contract through the next academic year." Fiona was stunned. "Thank you, Mayor. That's very generous, especially considering Harold Crenshaw's insinuations," the mayor finished with a grimace. "Snake River may be a small town, Miss O'Malley, but we're not fools. Everyone knows you were acting as a nurse during a medical emergency with Mrs. Simmons present throughout. Crenshaw overplayed his hand this time." "I appreciate your support," Fiona said sincerely. Mayor Hollister nodded. "Truth is, you've proven yourself these past months. The children are learning more than they ever have, and you've integrated well into our community." He hesitated, then added, "As for your attachment to Xenner, that's your personal business. But I will say he's a good man who deserves some happiness, and you seem to bring that to him." By Christmas Eve, Zachariah was well enough to be moved to more comfortable accommodations at the hotel, though he still required assistance for most activities. The Christmas pageant, delayed but not canceled, was scheduled for the afternoon. Fiona had insisted that Zachariah attend, arranging for a comfortable chair to be placed at the back of the schoolhouse. The performance was a triumph. James played a dignified Joseph, Sarah a shepherd with an impressively memorized speech about the Star of Bethlehem, and Lucy, an adorable angel who beamed when she spotted Zachariah watching from his special seat. Afterward, as parents and children mingled, enjoying the refreshments Martha Jenkins had organized, Zachariah beckoned Fiona to his side. "You've worked miracles with these children," he said, his eyes warm with pride. Lucy didn't forget a single line. "She was determined to impress you," Fiona replied with a smile. "All three of them were." "They're lucky to have you," he said softly. "We all are." The tenderness in his voice made Fiona's heart swell. Before she could respond, however, they were interrupted by Harold Crenshaw, who approached with what appeared to be forced civility. "Miss O'Malley, Mr. Xenner," he greeted them stiffly. "A fine production. The children performed admirably." "Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw," Fiona replied, wary of his unexpected pleasantness. "I wanted to inform you," he continued, addressing Zachariah, "that the bank has reconsidered its position regarding the Rocking X. We will not be pursuing an acquisition at this time." Zachariah's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a sudden change of heart, Crenshaw. What prompted it?" The banker's mouth tightened. "Let's just say the business climate has shifted." With a curt nod, he turned and left. "What was that about?" Fiona wondered aloud. "I believe," Mayor Hollister said, approaching with a satisfied expression, "that Harold has discovered the limits of his influence in Snake River. Several prominent depositors visited the bank yesterday, expressing concern about certain aggressive business practices. They suggested that alternative banking arrangements might be necessary if those practices continued." Zachariah looked at the mayor with new respect. "You organized that?" "Not officially, of course," Hollister replied with a twinkle in his eye. "But when prominent citizens like George Jenkins, Dr. Simmons, and myself express concerns about the stability of our community's financial institution, it carries weight." Thank you, Zachariah said simply. Consider it a Christmas gift, the mayor replied. And perhaps a small repayment for your support during the drought years. Snake River doesn't forget its true friends, Xenner. With that, he moved away to congratulate some of the young performers. Fiona looked at Zachariah with wonder. It seems the Crenshaw's power isn't as absolute as they believed. Communities change, he said thoughtfully. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal who people truly are and what truly matters. And what matters to you, Zachariah? Fiona asked softly. His eyes, still shadowed from his injury but clear with purpose, met hers. You, he said simply. You and the life we might build together if you're willing. Fiona's breath caught. Are you proposing, Mr. Xenner? Not yet, he replied with a small smile. When I do, it will be properly on one knee with a ring when I can stand on my own 2 feet again. But I am asking if you'll consider it when that time comes. Joy bloomed in Fiona's heart. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll consider it very favorably indeed. As the Christmas celebration continued around them, Fiona reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that day she'd been knocked into the mud. Zachariah had been right when he declared she would rise higher than any of them, not through vindication or revenge, but through finding her place in this community, her purpose in teaching its children, and her heart's companion in a man who had recognized her strength from the beginning. Spring came early to Snake River that year. The snow melted, wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, and Zachariah Xenner's injuries healed completely. By March, he was back to running the Rocking X, though he delegated more responsibilities to Daniel than he had before the accident. Margaret's health had fully returned as well. She had taken over management of the household, freeing Fiona to focus on her teaching duties. The school continued to flourish, with enrollment increasing as families from outlying homesteads heard of the quality education being offered. The Crenshaws maintained a cool distance, their influence in town noticeably diminished. Samuel had taken to spending more time in Boise, reportedly courting a banker's daughter there. Harold focused on his business, no longer interfering in town affairs as aggressively as before. On a warm evening in April, with the sun setting golden over the mountains, Zachariah took Fiona riding along the river that gave Snake River its name. They stopped at a peaceful bend where cottonwood trees provided shade and privacy. "It's beautiful here," Fiona remarked as they spread a blanket on the grass. "I can see why my brother chose this place to make his home." "It grows on you," Zachariah agreed, settling beside her. "I never intended to stay when I first arrived, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Especially now with you here." Fiona smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I feel the same way. Boston seems like another lifetime." "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "The libraries, the concerts, certain conveniences. But I've found something more valuable here, a place where I truly belong." Zachariah took her hand, his touch warm and familiar. "Fiona, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." He shifted, moving to one knee before her, and produced a small velvet box from his pocket. "I promised to do this properly when I could stand on my own 2 feet again." Fiona's heart raced as he opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small but brilliant diamond. "Fiona O'Malley," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've brought light and joy into my life when I thought both were behind me. You're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known, and I love you more than words can express. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of happiness filled Fiona's eyes. "Yes, Zachariah. Yes, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her feel both cherished and desired. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to build a life with you," he murmured. "A home, a family, a future." "We've already started," she replied, thinking of the bonds they'd formed with James, Sarah, and Lucy, with the community of Snake River with each other. Their wedding took place in June, a community celebration that seemed to involve the entire town. Margaret stood as Fiona's witness, radiant in her own happiness for her sister-in-law. The children participated eagerly, James as ring-bearer, Sarah and Lucy strewing flower petals down the aisle of the small church. Even Mayor Hollister seemed emotional as he delivered a speech at the reception, held on the grounds of the Rocking X. "Snake River has seen its share of challenges," he declared, raising a glass in toast. "But it has also seen how two people of character and courage can transform a community through their example. To Zachariah and Fiona Xenner, may your union be blessed with the same strength and devotion you have shown to all of us." As the celebration continued around them, Zachariah led Fiona away for a moment of privacy on the porch of the ranch house, now their home, as Margaret and the children had moved into town to be closer to the school. "Happy, Mrs. Xenner?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I must say being called Mrs. Xenner will take some getting used to. You have time," he chuckled. "A lifetime, in fact." "I like the sound of that," she murmured, turning in his arms to face him. "A lifetime with you." As he bent to kiss her, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that humiliating fall in the mud to this perfect day of celebration, every step, however difficult, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. True to Zachariah's prediction that first day, Fiona had indeed risen higher than any of them could have imagined. Not through revenge or triumph over those who had belittled her, but through the strength of her character, the depth of her compassion, and the power of love to transform not just two lives, but an entire community. 10 years later, the Rocking X Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in Idaho territory. Under Zachariah and Fiona's joint management, it had expanded its operations to include not just cattle, but also horses, and a small apple orchard that Fiona had insisted would thrive in the protected valley. The main house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, 8-year-old Thomas, named for both Fiona's brother and Zachariah's middle name, 6-year-old Elizabeth, and 3-year-old William. Margaret and her children lived in a comfortable home in Snake River, where James had followed in his father's footsteps as a skilled carpenter. Sarah was training to become a teacher under Fiona's occasional guidance, and Lucy had developed a remarkable talent for music, playing piano for church services and social events. Snake River itself had changed significantly. The railroad had finally reached the town, bringing new opportunities for commerce and growth. The one-room schoolhouse had been replaced by a proper school building with 3 classrooms and a library. Fiona still served on the school board, though she had passed the teaching duties to others when her children were born. Harold Crenshaw had retired, passing control of the bank to a manager from Boise who brought more progressive business practices. Samuel had married his banker's daughter and moved permanently to the larger city, his visits to Snake River infrequent and brief. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when they had first met, Fiona and Zachariah sat on their porch, watching their children play with a litter of puppies in the yard. "You ever think about that day?" Fiona asked, her head resting comfortably on her husband's shoulder. "When I fell in the mud, often," Zachariah admitted with a smile. Though I prefer to remember what came after, how you stood up, dignity intact, determined to face whatever Snake River could throw at you. I was terrified, she confessed, certain I'd made a terrible mistake in coming west. And now, Fiona gazed at their children, their home, the life they'd built together. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else or with anyone else. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. Zachariah pressed a kiss to her temple. You know, I meant what I said that day, that you would rise higher than any of them. But even I couldn't have predicted just how high. We rose together, Fiona corrected him. Everything we've accomplished has been a partnership. True enough, he agreed. Though I maintain you would have been extraordinary with or without me. Perhaps, she conceded with a smile, but I'm rather glad we'll never have to test that theory. As their children called for them to come see a particularly adventurous puppy, Fiona and Zachariah rose together, hand in hand. The journey from that muddy street to this life of purpose and love had not been easy, but every challenge had strengthened their bond, every obstacle overcome had deepened their commitment. The mud that had once symbolized Fiona's humiliation had become the fertile ground from which their shared life had grown rich, vibrant, and more beautiful than either could have imagined on that fateful day when a Boston schoolteacher fell, and a Western rancher helped her rise again.